I have some quick comments. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of rule in favor of banning children born here from being citizens. I don't see the Supreme Court as not. Supreme Court in the past has taken some decisions that seem to mangle the wording of the Constitution, but I don't see the Supreme Court doing it. The FBI doesn't make the decision whether to release the people held by the Tennessee cop. I don't think. They probably recommended it, and then the Tennessee Department has to make its own decision, in which case both of the statements you got would be true. In other words, FBI didn't tell them to do it. They recommended it, and the cop on the side made his decision. As far as the deportee to El Salvador, I'm getting a little ticked. Where was all of this due process when they let people in without checking their background, when they let 20 million people in without due process? How are we supposed to fix that mistake if we have to go through this entire rigmarole every single
Yep.
time we want to deport one?
Yep.
Where were the Democrats on due process when the United States Air Force accused me in a violation of free speech, or when they took my tenure away based on a false accusation in a tenure meeting, or when they withheld evidence of my innocence in the, where was all the cries for due process then? Sorry.
That's okay. Amber, go ahead.
I think you're spot on, Ken. And that's one of the arguments the Trump administration has been making is if we are required to go through a multi-year immigration court process for every single deportee, it would take us 100 years to get rid of all of the people that Biden let in to the country. And that's not a reasonable or efficient way to do this process. And I would say, the broader point here outside of the court's rulings, which we've discussed at length here, is that Gilmar Abrego Garcia got far more due process than a lot of deportees. If you're going out of the country on an expedited removal, you basically get a solitary hearing to establish that you crossed the border illegally and you're subject to expedited removal and you're out the door. He had a bond hearing, first bond hearing, where a judge agreed with the government's assessment that he was likely a member of MS-13 based on the confidential informant who the judge identified as a trusted source, based on the clothing he was wearing, which his lawyer sneakily referred to just as a Chicago Bulls sweatshirt, but it turned out it was much more than that because it had the rolls of money with the eyes, ears, and mouths of the presidents crossed out. And he was picked up with two other ranking members of the gang. So the judge believed that evidence was credible, that he was a member of MS-13 and was likely a danger to the community and was denied bond. He also, by the way, had failed to show up for traffic court violations, which is why he was also deemed a flight risk. He appealed that decision to an immigration court of appeals. They agreed with the first judge's assessment, denied him bond. Then he asked for asylum based on those claims that he would have been subject to persecution from the rival gang Barrio 18 if he were removed to El Salvador. Frankly, the evidence on that was incredibly thin. I read through the court documents, and it was mostly affidavits from members of his family who don't even live in El Salvador, who actually live in the United States, and had left El Salvador before this alleged incident where his family was targeted by Barrio 18 ever happened. But nonetheless, the judge decided that he was not eligible for asylum, but the much lower standard of the withholding of removal, where he could have been deported to any third country besides El Salvador. So to me, that's a pretty significant amount of due process for any deportee.
Right. And how could we do that for 20 million people?
Exactly.